The single mom waitress was offered $200 to quit the mafia boss, matched it with $20, 000. The air inside Penny's lantern was thick with the smell of stale coffee and industrial bleach, a perfume Nora Vale knew better than her own skin. At 27, she felt worn smooth as the Formica countertops she wiped down 100 times a night. Greyhaven, New Columbia, was a city that chewed up people like her, people who lived in the narrow spaces between paychecks. Her life revolved around these double shifts, the ache in her arches, and the small, warm hand of her 6-year-old son, Milo. Every pot of coffee she poured, every plate of lukewarm fries she delivered, was for him, for the tiny, drafty apartment that was theirs, and for the fragile stability it represented. The bell above the door chimed, admitting a slice of the damp night air and a man who didn't belong. He wore a suit that was trying too hard, the polyester shining unpleasantly under the fluorescent lights. He slid into a booth, his eyes scanning the sparse late-night crowd before landing on Nora. He didn't order coffee. He waited until she was clearing the adjacent table, then motioned her over with a flick of his fingers. His voice was oily. Nora Vale. It wasn't a question. Nora's stomach tightened. She kept her face neutral, the practiced mask of the service industry. "Can I get you something, sir?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He slid 2 crumpled $100 bills across the table. "I'm with the Ashmore Redev Group. We're improving the neighborhood. You understand? Progress." Nora looked at the money. $200. It was a week's groceries, a utility bill paid, a breath of air. "I don't understand," she said, her voice flat. "We need this location vacant. We need you to quit," he said, leaning in. The smell of cheap cologne washed over her. "Tonight, take the money. Don't be the one holding up the project." Nora pushed the bills back toward him. "I can't do that. I have a kid. I need this job." She needed the night shift insurance, the one thing keeping Milo's asthma medication affordable. The man's smile vanished. "People who hold up progress, things happen to them. Nasty things. You live in that old tenement on Ashmore. Don't you old pipes in that building? Be a real shame if there was some kind of accident, a gas leak." The threat hung in the air, thick and toxic as the grease clinging to the hood vents. Nora felt a cold spike of fear, but her spine stiffened. She thought of Milo's sleeping face. "Get out," she whispered. "Wrong answer, sweetheart." The bell chimed again. This time, the silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't just a lull in conversation. It was a vacuum. Every sound in the diner, the clatter of a fork, the sizzle of the grill, the low hum of the coolers stopped. The man who entered was the antithesis of the polyester suit. Antonio Cacciatore moved with a fluid, predator's grace. His suit was dark, perfectly tailored, whispering of old money and undeniable power. He was the head of the Morello Circle, a name spoken in hushed tones across Greyhaven. Their code was infamous, almost archaic: no women, no children, no human trafficking. It was a line of honor in an ocean of crime, and it made him more dangerous, not less. He didn't look at the man in the booth. He walked directly to the counter and took a stool, his back to the room. Nora, trembling slightly, moved to serve him. "Coffee. Black," he said, his voice a low rumble. As she reached for a cup, he glanced sideways, his gaze falling on the $200 still sitting on the booth table. A small, humorless laugh escaped him. "Inflation," he murmured, more to himself than to her. He then looked directly at the man from Ashmore. "That's your offer." The cheap suit man paled, his bravado evaporating. "Mr. Cacciatore, we were just conducting a business transaction." Antonio Cacciatore turned slowly on his stool. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a simple white envelope, thick with cash. He didn't slide it. He placed it deliberately on the counter in front of Nora. "Here is $20,000, son," he said, his voice carrying easily through the tomb-quiet diner. "This is for staying, not for leaving." Nora stared at the envelope. $20,000. It was a number so large it felt fictional. It was a down payment. It was escape. It was a cage. Her manager, Trudy, was frozen behind the register, her hand shaking so hard she couldn't light the cigarette she was holding. The two truckers in the corner booth had stopped eating. Nora couldn't breathe. She was balanced on a knife edge between the fierce pride of a working mother and the paralyzing fear of what this meant. The Ashmore agent stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "This isn't over," he hissed, his eyes darting between Nora and the Mafia boss. Antonio Cacciatore didn't raise his voice. He took a sip of the coffee Nora hadn't realized she'd poured. "The vulnerable," he said, looking into his cup, "are not meant to be crushed." It was a dismissal. The agent snatched his $200 and practically fled the diner, the bell clanging mockingly behind him. Nora's hand rested on the envelope. It was warm. She took the $20,000 home. She hid it in an old shoebox under her bed, terrified to touch it, terrified not to. It felt like dirty money, like blood money, but it also felt like safety. The next morning, a certified letter arrived. The building appraisal she'd been fighting for months, the one she needed to prevent a rent hike she couldn't afford, had been suddenly and inexplicably approved. She went to work that night. Her nerves frayed. The $20,000 under her bed felt like a sleeping snake. The shift was quiet. Almost too quiet. It was near closing, just after 2 a.m., when she went to the kitchen for a fresh pot of oil for the fryer. She grabbed her heavy steel utility cart, the one she always used, and gave it a hard pull. The cart lurched sideways. One of the front wheels, sheared almost completely through, collapsed. The heavy, full vat of boiling oil tilted violently, splashing a scalding wave onto the floor, missing her feet by an inch. Nora stumbled back, her heart hammering against her ribs. She stared at the severed wheel, the glint of freshly cut metal. It wasn't an accident. It was a message. She had stayed, and this was the price. The near miss with the scalding oil vibrated in Nora's nerves for hours, a low, metallic hum of fear. That night, she wedged a chair under the cheap knob of her apartment door. The $20,000 hidden in the shoebox under her bed felt less like a shield and more like bait. In the weak morning light, she met Lena Park by the rattling mailboxes in their lobby. Lena, a librarian with the sharp, observant eyes of someone who reads both books and people, was sorting through a stack of notices. Many were addressed to tenants who had already fled. "You're still here," Lena noted, her voice low. "I heard there was trouble at the Lantern last night." "It was nothing," Nora lied, pulling Milo's backpack strap higher on his shoulder. Lena tapped a stark white envelope in her hand. "It's not nothing, Nora. This is happening all over Ashmore. It starts with a cash offer. If you refuse, the threats begin. Then the real moves. People in this building have seen their mortgage rates jump. 50–60% overnight, automated adjustments. The letters say they aren't asking people to leave. They are forcing them out." "Ashmore Redev Group," Nora said. The name felt like grit in her mouth. "That's the face," Lena confirmed, her eyes dark. But the hands doing the squeezing belonged to someone else. The paranoia was a physical weight as she walked Milo to school. The sky over Greyhaven was a bruised, heavy gray. She felt the eyes on her before she saw the vehicle. A black SUV, expensive and new, with windows tinted to an illegal darkness. Idled halfway down the block, it had no license plates. The moment she and Milo stepped off the curb, the SUV pulled out, maintaining a lazy, predatory distance. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the follow-up to the cut wheel. This was the gas leak promised. She forced her voice to sound bright, casual. "Hey, Milo Bug, race you to the corner. Let's take the shortcut through the iron weave." "Yeah," Milo yelled, oblivious, and sprinted ahead. Nora grabbed his hand and pulled him left. Ducking into the chaotic artery of the Iron Weave Market, it was a sprawling, open-air labyrinth of canvas stalls, shouting vendors, and narrow walkways clogged with shoppers. The air smelled of incense, frying fish, and damp pavement. The SUV could not follow them here. She wove between stalls selling second-hand tools and crates of bright, glossy peppers, glancing back only once. The black vehicle was cruising the perimeter, a shark unable to enter the reef. She didn't slow her pace until they were on the other side, the schoolyard fence in sight. She hugged Milo, the terror making her grip too tight, and watched him disappear into the brick building. When she returned to her apartment, a clean white van was parked at the curb, the side read, North Point Alarms. A technician in a crisp blue jumpsuit was already examining her doorframe. "Miss Vale, we're here for the install." "I didn't order anything," she said, her stomach tightening. "It's all taken care of," the man said politely. He handed her a heavy, sealed box containing a steel deadbolt, 3 window sensors, and a keypad. Tucked beneath the instruction manual was a small, cream-colored card, thick as cardstock. The black ink was sharp, the handwriting precise. It said, "Don't let them teach your son about fear." It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. Antonio Cacciatore. The alarm system was legitimate, a registered company. A clean front, she realized, for a protection she hadn't asked for. The afternoon shift at Penny's Lantern was thick with an ugly, simmering tension. Trudy, the manager, kept wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes darting to the door. At 4 p.m., the man in the cheap suit returned. He was not alone. The 2 men who flanked him were a different species. They wore heavy boots and bomber jackets, and they moved with the heavy, arrogant confidence of men who break things for a living. One had a neck thick as a piling, his skin covered in swirling ink. The other had dead, flat eyes that seemed to absorb the light in the room. They were Sable Court. "Trudy," the agent said, slapping a sheaf of papers onto the Formica counter. "Playtime is over. This is a temporary renovation clause. Health code violations. You're shutting down for 30 days. Sign it." "We don't have any violations," Trudy whispered, her face pale. "You do now." The inked man sneered. He picked up a glass sugar dispenser, weighing it in his hand, his dead-eyed gaze fixed on Nora. "Sign." The bell over the diner door chimed softly. Antonio Cacciatore walked in. He moved with the same fluid, unhurried grace. He ignored the men at the counter, taking his usual stool. He looked only at Nora. "Coffee," he ordered. "Black." The diner went silent. The air crackled. The inked man stopped smiling. The dead-eyed man shifted his weight, his arrogance evaporating like steam. They knew exactly who he was. Nora's hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the cup, but she poured the coffee. Antonio took a slow sip. He did not look at the enforcers. He did not raise his voice. He simply watched them in the reflection of the chrome napkin dispenser. It was enough. The inked man cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. "This ain't worth the heat, man," he muttered to the agent. "But the clause." "Let's go." The dead-eyed man was already backing toward the door, his hands visible. The agent, his face flushed with humiliation, snatched his papers from the counter and stormed out. Antonio finished his coffee. He placed a $5 bill on the counter. He finally looked at Nora, his gaze level. "You owe me nothing," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But if you are staying, stand tall." He was almost out the door when her voice, sharp and clear, stopped him. "Wait." She ran to the staff lockers in the back. Her hands found the thick white envelope. She walked back out, her chin high. She placed the $20,000 on the counter in front of him. "I can't take this," she said. Antonio looked at the money, then at her face. "I appreciate the locks," she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "But this makes me something I'm not. I'm not for sale, and I'm not your charity case." She pushed the envelope toward him, then she paused. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a single, wrinkled $100 bill from her own tips. She slid it away from the envelope. "I'm keeping this one," she said, her pride a fierce ache in her chest, "so I don't feel like I'm taking a handout. A slow smile touched the corner of Antonio Cacciatore's mouth. It was a genuine, unexpected expression that softened the hard lines of his face. He pushed the thick envelope back toward her, but closed her fingers over the single $100 bill. "Then," he said, "we will consider it a deposit on safety." He left the rest of the money and walked out. Late that night, long after closing, a crash echoed from the alley. Not a bottle, but something heavier. Nora grabbed a cast-iron skillet and eased the back door open. The alley was empty, smelling of rain and rotting garbage. And fresh paint. Sprayed in crude, dripping black across the brick wall was a stylized symbol, the snarling head of a wolf, the mark of the Sable Court. She called the Metropolitan Patrol. 2 officers arrived 45 minutes later, their expressions bored. "Kids," one said, gesturing at the graffiti with his flashlight. "Tagging." "That's the Sable Court," Nora insisted, her voice tight. "They were here today. They threatened my manager." The officer sighed. "Unless you saw them holding the can, ma'am, it's just vandalism. We'll file a report." They were gone in 5 minutes. When Nora got home, Lena Park was waiting on the landing, her bathrobe pulled tight. "They didn't do anything, did they?" "They filed a report," Nora said bitterly. Lena looked out the grime-covered hallway window at the city lights that felt 1,000,000 miles away. "Around here," she said softly, "the law only works when there's someone strong enough to enforce it." The physical threats had been crude, designed to shock. The next attack was quieter, colder, and far more terrifying. It arrived in a stiff, cream-colored envelope bearing the insignia of Greyhaven Asset Recovery. Inside, formal. Lifeless prose informed Nora that an old, unpaid medical debt from Milo's emergency room visit for an asthma attack 2 years prior, a bill she thought the state insurance had covered, had been purchased by their firm. The original amount was $800. The new amount, with accumulated interest and processing fees, was just over $9,000. They required payment in full within 30 days, or they would begin wage garnishment proceedings. It was a death sentence. Garnishment meant she would lose the apartment. It was a suffocating, bloodless maneuver. The Sable Court wolf painted on the wall was a shout. This letter was a whisper that could kill her. 2 days later, a man found her during her break. He wasn't like the cheap suit agent or the thuggish enforcers. This man was smooth, dressed in a tasteful charcoal turtleneck and slacks. He looked like a university professor, but his eyes held the same flat emptiness as the Sable Court heavies. "Miss Vale," he said, offering a disarmingly warm smile. "I'm Elias Cade. I'm a community consultant for the Ashmore district." Nora's hands, already chapped from bleach water, gripped the railing of the diner's back steps. "I know who you work for." "Then you know we prefer solutions to conflict," Elias said, his tone reasonable. He gestured to the letter she was still clutching in her pocket. "Greyhaven Asset Recovery, an unfortunate, aggressive company, but they are persuadable. Leave your position at Penny's Lantern. Go quietly. As a gesture of goodwill for your cooperation, that $9,000 debt will simply vanish." The offer was tempting. It was an escape hatch, a clean break from the fear and the boiling oil and the threatening letters. But Nora looked past him, at the graffiti of the wolf. She thought of Lena's warning. If she ran, they would just move on to the next person, the next family. "No," Nora said. Elias Cade's smile didn't falter, but his eyes went cold. He tilted his head as if listening to a distant, unpleasant sound. "That's a pity. You're thinking of this as a sprint. Miss Vale, but this is a marathon of endurance. Your son. He seems like a bright boy. He will learn to endure." The threat was unmistakable, aimed directly at Milo. It was no longer about her job. It was about her child's future. That evening, a black sedan, identical to the one that had followed her, idled at the curb as she left the diner. It didn't follow. It was just there, a statement. When she got to her apartment, Antonio Cacciatore was leaning against the peeling paint of the hallway wall, waiting. He didn't speak. He simply nodded toward the stairs. "Come with me. There's something you need to see." The Verano Tower was in a different universe. It was downtown, a sleek monolith of black glass and steel that pierced the Greyhaven sky. The lobby was silent, smelling of polished marble and expensive, subtle citrus. They rode a private elevator to the 14th floor. The doors opened not onto a penthouse, but a sprawling, meticulously organized corporate office. The sign on the glass door read, "Morello Circle Logistics, Global Imports and Shipping." It was quiet, professional, and utterly legitimate. "This," Antonio said, gesturing to the rows of empty desks, "is the business that pays for the suits." He led her to a back room, a conference area dominated by a massive backlit map of Greyhaven. This map was different. It was covered in pins, red, blue, and yellow. "Ashmore," he said, tapping the cluster of red pins that covered her neighborhood. "In the last 6 months, there have been 14 accidental fires in this district, all in buildings that refused the Ashmore Redev Group's first offer." Nora felt a chill. "My God, the gas leak!" "Was phase 2, Antonio finished. A woman entered the room, holding a tablet. She was sharp, with dark hair pulled back into a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a headset as if it were a permanent appendage. "This is Marla Kay," Antonio said. "She handles my books, both sets." Marla didn't smile. She tapped her tablet, and a complex flowchart appeared on a large screen. "The money trail is sloppy, but effective. Ashmore Redev Group makes the public threats. The actual buyouts and laundered cash are funneled through a shell company registered in Delaware. It's called Third Lantern Holdings." "Third Lantern," Nora breathed. "Penny's lantern." "They're mocking us," Marla said, her voice clipped. "Third Lantern Holdings shares 3 board members with the Sable Court's Legal Defense Fund. It's a closed loop. They're using intimidation to buy low, and they have a city contract to sell high once the district is redeveloped." Nora's head was spinning. This was bigger than a few thugs and a greedy developer. This was a conspiracy that reached into the city's infrastructure. "What do we do?" Nora asked, looking at Antonio. "Do we take this to, I don't know, the CARO, the Continental Anti-Racketeering Office?" Antonio looked at the map, his expression unreadable in the glow of the red pins. "You can," he said. "The legal way. It will take years. It will be buried in paperwork. By the time they assign an investigator, Ashmore will be condos, and you and your son will be long gone. Or you handle it," Nora said, understanding. "The street way." He turned to face her, his gaze intense, cutting through the moral fog. "I am not a good man, Nora, but I have a code. And Elias Cade, with his threats against children, does not. If I handle this, it will be fast, but it will not be clean." She stood in the silence of the 14th floor office, caught between 2 impossible worlds, the sterile, slow failure of the law and the dark, effective efficiency of the mob. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why me, the money, the locks, this? Why?" Antonio took a step closer. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the heat radiating from him. "When that cheap suit threatened you, you pushed his money back. When his thugs came, you stood your ground, and when I gave you an escape, you threw it back in my face and kept $100 as a deposit. I am protecting you, Nora, because you are worthy of protection, not because you are obedient." The distinction settled over her. He wasn't saving a damsel. He was backing a fighter. He was offering respect, not charity. She took a deep breath, the smell of bleach and old coffee clinging to her, a stark contrast to his expensive cologne. "Those men," she said, her voice finding its strength. "The cheap suits from Ashmore. They come into the Lantern all the time. They sit in the corner booth. They talk. They think I'm just furniture." A new light entered Antonio's eyes, a dangerous, appreciative gleam. "Go on." "I'll stay," Nora said. "I'll stand tall, and I'll listen." That night, Nora sat at her small kitchen table. The $9,000 bill was laid out flat, a death warrant in black and white beside it. Milo was drawing with his crayons. He pushed the paper toward her, his face bright with pride. "It's for you, Mommy." It was a drawing of their apartment building, but it was different. It was clean. The broken window was fixed, and the peeling front door was painted a bright, happy blue. It was a picture of a house that was safe. Nora looked at the drawing, her vision blurring. She folded the collection letter and tore it into small, precise pieces. She would not run. She would fight. Nora was no longer just a waitress. She was a ghost in plain sight, a listener. The men from the Ashmore Redev group had grown wary, keeping their voices low, but the contractors they hired, the men who actually did the dirty work, were loud. Mr. Niles was a fixture at the counter every morning at 6. A beefy man who drove a haul truck for a private construction firm. He liked his coffee strong enough to strip paint and his eggs over easy. He also liked to complain. "It's a rush job, I tell ya, Nora," he grumbled, mopping up yolk with a piece of toast. "Gotta work Saturday, the holiday weekend." Nora refilled his mug, her smile practiced and weary. "Big project. Mister, Niles sounds like good overtime, at least." "Overtime my foot," he scoffed. "They got us on standby to clear the last 3 tenements on Ashmore, the ones by the old rail spur. Management wants them prepped for demo by Monday morning. Means a full burn-off." Nora's hand holding the hot coffee pot did not tremble. "A burn-off? This weekend with the wind we've been having?" "You're telling me, but the boss says the paperwork is expedited. They want it done quiet-like. Saturday night. 3 buildings. Gone. Just sweep up the ash." She didn't run to a phone. She finished her shift, her mind a cold, clear engine. She relayed the address, the time, and the phrase expedited paperwork to the number Marla Key had given her. Antonio's response was not a wave of violence. It was a pinprick. An anonymous complaint, complete with grainy photographs of unsecured fuel barrels at the site, was filed with the Greyhaven Infrastructure Safety Committee. On Monday, Mr. Niles was practically vibrating with fury. "Bureaucrats," he yelled, slamming his mug on the counter. "Whole job's on hold. Some pencil pusher got a tip about unsafe demo conditions. Now we gotta wait for a full inspection. They shut the whole site down, costing me $1,000 easy." Nora just poured his coffee. The 3 buildings were still standing. Elias K. did not appreciate the delay. His retaliation was swift and targeted. The rain began on a Friday night, a cold, driving Greyhaven storm that slicked the streets and smelled of the ocean. Nora was in the back, prepping the fry station for the dinner rush. When the odor hit her, it wasn't the familiar, nutty smell of cooking oil. It was sharp, chemical and invasive, kerosene. Penny's Lantern was an old building, relying on a mini pipeline that fed a massive kerosene furnace in the basement. The pipe ran along the exterior wall in the back alley. "Trudy, do you smell that?" Nora called out. Trudy, the manager, sniffed the air and her face went white. "Oh, Lord, it's coming from the back." An oily, iridescent sheen was seeping under the back door, creeping across the linoleum floor. It was moving steadily, sickeningly, toward the open pilot light of the kitchen's water heater. This wasn't a leak. It was a severed line. Elias was done framing them. He was going to burn them out and blame it on their own faulty equipment. "Trudy, get everyone out now," Nora yelled, grabbing the heavy red fire extinguisher from the wall. "Call for help. Tell them it's a major fuel line break." The alley was a roaring curtain of water. Just as Nora braced herself to spray the pilot light, a black sedan mounted the curb, its headlights cutting through the deluge. Antonio Cacciatore was out of the car before it stopped. He wasn't the elegant boss from the diner. He was dressed in a dark Henley, soaked to the skin in seconds, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. 2 men, Rook and Jax, emerged with him. Built like the brick walls they were leaning against, they carried heavy toolkits and tubes of industrial-grade epoxy. "Nora, get back inside, now," Antonio commanded. His voice wasn't a request, it was an anchor in the chaos. "Jax, main feed at the street, cut it. Rook, the pilot light, go." Nora watched from the cracked doorway, rain lashing her face. Antonio didn't just supervise. He slid into the narrow, flooded space between the wall and a dumpster, finding the breach in the pipe. It wasn't a rust spot, it was a clean, hacksawed groove. He worked with a focused, terrifying calm, his bare hands cleaning the pipe in the freezing rain, applying the fast-acting sealant, the toxic fumes thick enough to choke on. He was saving her diner, not with a gun, but with tools and a chilling competence. He defused the bomb while it was ticking. The pipe was sealed, the main valve shut, the diner saved, but the kerosene had ruined half the kitchen stock, and the floodwater had seeped into the walls. Nora's apartment, small and safe, felt like a sanctuary. Antonio had followed her. He stood in her small kitchen, dripping on the cheap linoleum, looking utterly out of place. Milo, woken by the late hour and the strange man, peeked out from his bedroom, rubbing his eyes. Antonio was drying his dark hair with one of Nora's faded dish towels. Milo, with the unfiltered curiosity of a 6-year-old, stepped into the room. "Mommy, is he a superhero?" He pointed at Antonio. "He stopped the fire." Antonio froze, the towel in his hands. He looked at Milo, and for a second the hard mask of the Morello Circle boss vanished. He knelt slowly, bringing himself down to Milo's level, his expensive trousers soaking up the grime on her floor. "No, Milo," Antonio said, his voice softer than Nora had ever heard it. "I'm not a superhero. I just know how to fix broken things." He tucked Milo back into bed, and when he returned, Nora was by the window, watching the storm wash Greyhaven clean. They stood in the quiet darkness, the adrenaline fading, leaving only exhaustion and a strange, shared intimacy. "Elias Cade," Nora said, her voice hollow. "He threatened my son. He said Milo would learn to endure. I keep him here, in this, and I feel this constant, nameless dread every time he walks to school, every time I hear a car slow down." Antonio stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. He stared out the window, his reflection a hard silhouette against the glass. "I don't have children," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I never believed I could, to bring a life into this, to be responsible for it. That fear you feel, Nora, that terror of failing them, it's the most human thing there is. It's the one part of you they can't touch." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man, not the myth, a man defined by his own set of rules, his own vulnerabilities, a bond formed between them in that rainy darkness, silent and profound. His phone vibrated, a single, sharp buzz. He glanced at the screen, a text from Marla. His expression hardened. "My team just traced a new wire transfer to Third Lantern Holdings," he said. "A very large one. It's from the Hopecrest Foundation." "A charity," Nora frowned. "For orphans, I thought." "It's the cleanest washing machine in the city," Antonio said grimly. "They're escalating. This is bigger than Ashmore. This is high level. I want you and Milo out of the city. I have a house in the suburbs, clean air, a yard. You'll be safe there until I finish this." It was the escape hatch she had craved for years. Safety, green grass, no more fear. But she looked at Milo's drawing taped to the refrigerator, the house with the bright blue door. If she ran, that house would never be real. "No," she said, her voice quiet but unshakable. "If I go, they win. They take the lantern. They take this neighborhood. They win. I'm staying." Antonio studied her face for a long moment, a strange, fierce pride in his eyes. He nodded once. "Then we fight." He left before dawn. The next afternoon, the diner was a wreck, but they were cleaning it, the smell of bleach overpowering the kerosene. Elias Cade walked in. He wore his pleasant, professorial smile. He didn't order. "Just checking on the neighborhood, Miss Vale," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Heard you had a spot of trouble. Such a shame. These old buildings. So unsafe." He walked toward the restrooms in the back. He was gone for less than a minute. On his way out, He paused by the corner booth, the one the Ashmore men always favored. He reached up, pretending to straighten a loose ceiling tile, his hand lingering for just a second. Nora's blood ran cold. He hadn't come to threaten. He had come to prepare. He was planning a camera, a microphone. He wasn't just planning another accident, and he was staging a final one, and he wanted to make sure he had the perfect view. The surveillance device Elias Cade had planted was a violation, a cold electronic eye in their sanctuary. Antonio had Rook, one of his most trusted men. Sweep the diner. The bug was found, small and sophisticated, tucked above the acoustic tile in the corner, just as Nora had suspected. Rook neutralized it, but the act left a lingering chill. The diner was clean, but it felt tainted. That evening, Antonio did not come in his usual imposing sedan. He arrived in a quiet, unassuming SUV, letting himself into Nora's building with a key she hadn't given him. "You and Milo," he said, his voice low. "You need to breathe. Real air." He didn't take them to a park. He took them back to the Verano Tower, the black glass monolith that housed his legitimate empire. They rode the private elevator past the logistics floor, all the way to the roof. The steel doors opened onto a shock of humid warmth. Under the dark gray haven sky, a massive glass conservatory glowed, a secret garden suspended above the city. It was filled with rows upon rows of terracotta pots, overflowing with green. "What is this place?" Nora whispered. Stepping into the damp air, thick with the scent of earth and chlorophyll, Milo, sensing the magic, ran ahead. "My grandfather's," Antonio said. He brushed his fingers across a sprawling basil plant, and the sharp, clean scent cut through the city's smog. He said you could never trust a man who didn't grow something. This is where I come to remember what peace smells like. Nora watched Milo dart between rows of rosemary and mint, his laughter echoing softly off the glass. It was the first time she had heard him laugh like that in weeks. She leaned against a workbench, the tension of the last few days settling in her bones, and she winced, flexing her wrist. "What is it?" Antonio's gaze sharpened, missing nothing. "It's nothing," she said, a reflexive lie. "Just from cleaning up the kerosene mess, a broken jar." She looked down. A tiny, dark sliver of glass was embedded in the tender skin of her wrist, inflamed and angry. He was beside her in an instant. The air between them, already warm, became charged. He looked at her wrist, then at her face. He didn't just reach out. He stopped, his hands hovering, a fraction of an inch from her skin. "May I?" he asked. The formality of it, the raw respect in the question, tightened her throat. She nodded. His touch was impossibly gentle. His fingers were warm and calloused, a stark contrast to the smooth, cold image he presented to the world. He held her wrist, his thumb resting lightly on her pulse point. Nora's breath caught. She was intensely aware of his solid, steady touch against the frantic, bird-wing flutter of her own heart. He kept his eyes focused on the wound, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was a man who moved mountains with intimidation and force, yet he held her as if she were made of spun glass. He retrieved a small metal kit from a potting bench and, with a surgeon's steadiness, he lifted the glass free. A single, dark drop of blood welled up. "He hurt you," Antonio said, his voice a low growl. It wasn't a question. "I'm used to it," she whispered. "You shouldn't be," he replied, his eyes finally lifting to meet hers. The intensity in them, the protective fire, made her shiver for a reason that had nothing to do with the cold. He bandaged the small cut with slow, deliberate movements. Milo, exhausted by his exploration, had curled up on a cushioned bench and fallen fast asleep. From a small, hidden speaker, soft instrumental music played, a simple melody on a cello. Strings of yellow cafe lights were strung across the glass ceiling, and their warm glow turned the greenhouse into a private constellation. "You feel safe here," Antonio murmured, looking at Milo's sleeping form. "We both do," Nora admitted. He didn't speak. He simply held out his hand, palm up, an invitation, not a command. She hesitated, her life a catalog of bad decisions and broken trust. But this felt different. This felt solid. She placed her hand in his. He drew her onto the small stone patio in the center of the room. He placed one hand on the small of her back, the other clasping hers, and began to move. It was a slow, simple dance, a rocking step barely in time with the music. Nora, whose body was a machine built for carrying trays and scrubbing floors, felt awkward, stiff. "Just breathe, Nora," he murmured, his voice close to her ear. She let out a breath she felt she'd been holding since the cheap suit man first sat in her booth. The tension she carried in her shoulders, a permanent armor, began to dissolve. She was used to being leaned on, the sole support for her small world. She had forgotten what it felt like to have someone to lean against. Tentatively, she let her head rest on his shoulder. It was a perfect fit. He smelled of clean soap, expensive wool, and the faint green scent of the basil he had touched. His hand on her back was a solid, warm pressure, a silent promise. She closed her eyes. The fear, the debt, the sable court wolf, the kerosene had all receded, fading to a distant hum. The song ended, the last note hanging in the warm air, but they didn't stop moving. He pulled back just enough to see her face. His thumb brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his touch electric, his eyes searched hers, asking a question, waiting. Nora knew this was a precipice. She knew what he was, what world he lived in. But in that moment, he was just a man who grew basil, a man who had been gentle. She was tired of being afraid. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He leaned in, his lips brushing hers, a test. It was soft, hesitant. He pulled back a fraction of an inch, his forehead resting against hers, their breath mingling. "If you say stop," he whispered, his voice thick. "Everything stops, no matter what." "Don't stop," she breathed. The kiss that followed was not a collision of passion, but a slow, dawning recognition. It was warmth. It was shelter. It was the taste of mint from the air and the deep, grounding reassurance of his strength. His hand moved from her back, sliding up into her hair, his fingers tangling, tilting her head to deepen the kiss. Nora's hands, chapped and calloused, clutched the lapels of his jacket, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in the world. She felt a tremor run through him, or perhaps it was her own. His control was absolute, yet she could feel the simmering heat beneath it. His lips moved from her mouth to her jaw, his breath hot against her skin, and she arched against him, a silent plea. His arm tightened around her waist, pulling her flush against him. It was an embrace that was both protective and possessive, a claim. He kissed her again, a deep, slow exploration that left her breathless and anchored all at once, a promise made in the warm, earthy darkness hidden from the broken city below. When she woke, it was to gray morning light, and she was in her own bed. She had a vague, hazy memory of being carried, of feeling weightless. The apartment smelled incredible. She stumbled out of her room to find Antonio in her tiny kitchen. He was still in the trousers from last night, but his shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong, capable forearms. He was at her stove, and Milo was at the table, giggling. She's awake, Milo cheered. Antonio turned, a spatula in his hand, a small smile on his face. He said he liked cheese in his omelets. The sheer domesticity of the scene, the image of this powerful, dangerous man making breakfast for her son, hit Nora with the force of a physical blow. It was a glimpse of a life she had never dared to imagine. Later, while Milo was happily occupied with a new, expensive-looking truck Antonio had somehow produced, Nora stood by him at the sink. "Antonio," she began, her voice quiet, "last night was real," he finished, not turning from the plate he was washing. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Not of you. I'm afraid that me and Milo, we make you vulnerable. They'll see me as a way to get to you. I don't want to be your weakness." He stopped. He turned, drying his hands on a towel, and faced her. He took her face between his hands, his gaze firm and unwavering. "Nora, look at me. You are not my weakness." He paused, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "You are my compass. You're the one who reminds me what north is. There is a very big difference." Before she could process that, his phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Marla. His expression instantly hardened, the brief domestic peace shattering. "Hopecrest," he said, his voice flat. "They're hosting their annual Founders Gala this weekend at the Auric Hall. The mayor, the city council, the head of the urban development board, everyone who matters will be there." "The people who are letting this happen," Nora said, her blood running cold. "And the people making it happen. Elias Cade, the CEO of Third Lantern, and the president of Hopecrest, Celia Dorn, all in one room, toasting each other while they plan to burn families out of their homes. Marla's team can't get in. Security is biometric." He was already pacing, his mind calculating angles. "We need to hear what they're saying." Nora looked down at her own hands, hands that had served 10,000 cups of coffee, that knew the precise, aching balance of a fully loaded tray, that knew how to be invisible. "Your men can't get in," she said, her voice finding a new, sharp clarity. "But they will be hiring servers." Antonio stopped pacing. He looked at her, his eyes dark with understanding, and then, with immediate refusal, "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous." "You fixed my broken things," she said, touching the small, neat bandage on her wrist. "Now let me fix mine. They're looking for gangsters. They're not looking for the waitress. I know how to be invisible. I know how to listen. I'm going in." Marla Key's version of a makeover was efficient and terrifying. There was no makeup, no elegant dress. Instead, Nora was fitted with a standard black and white catering uniform, procured from the company servicing the gala. The real work was in the technology. "The earpiece is the size of a bean," Marla explained in the sterile environment of the Verano Tower office, her fingers moving with practiced speed. "It's audio in only. I'll be your eye in the sky, guiding you. But the real piece of work is this." She produced a standard-issue brushed aluminum serving tray. It looked identical to the hundreds that would be used at the Auric Hall. "It's weighted incorrectly," Marla said. "The left side is heavier. Inside the molding is a high-fidelity directional microphone and a solid-state recorder. You must keep the left edge pointed directly at your targets. To activate, you press the small rivet here, by the handle, twice fast. It will record for 30 minutes before it needs a memory swap. You will not get a memory swap." "And security?" Nora asked, her throat dry. "Rook and Jax have been on the Auric Hall's hired security roster for 2 weeks, Antonio said, stepping out of the shadows. He was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking every inch the legitimate businessman he pretended to be. "They'll be working the perimeter and the service entrances. They won't be able to pull you out, but they can create static if you need it. You go in, you get the conversation, you get out. If it feels wrong, you walk away. The mission is aborted. We find another way." Nora looked at him. "They're planning to burn people out of their homes. Antonio, there is no other way." The Auric Hall was a cathedral of wealth. Gold leaf climbed the towering marble columns, and a chandelier the size of a car dripped crystals over a floor polished to a mirror shine. Men in tuxedos and women in glittering gowns laughed, their voices bouncing off the frescoed ceiling, while they sipped champagne that cost more than Nora's monthly rent. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roast duck. It was so far removed from the bleach and stale coffee of Penny's Lantern that Nora felt like she had passed through a portal. She moved through the crowd, her tray held high, her posture perfect. She was invisible, just as she had predicted. She was furniture. "Target 1, Celia Dorn, is by the main fountain," Marla's voice whispered in her ear. "Red dress, white hair. She's speaking with Councilman Davies from the Urban Development Review Board." Nora glided closer, offering champagne. "A tragedy, of course," Celia Dorn was saying, her voice a smooth, cultured syrup. She was the matriarch of Hopecrest, a woman lauded on magazine covers for her philanthropy. The decay in Ashmore is heartbreaking, but our new Fresh Start relocation fund will ensure every one of those families finds a better, cleaner place to live. It's a bold move, Celia, the councilman said, beaming. The board is thrilled to see Hopecrest taking the lead on revitalization. We simply must, Celia said, placing a delicate, jeweled hand on his arm. Target 2 approaching, Marla's voice cut in. Elias Cade, 3 o'clock. Nora turned, her heart skipping. Elias, smooth and professorial in his own tuxedo, kissed Celia's hand. A wonderful event. Celia, a triumph for the children. Elias, good of you to come, Celia said. Councilman, you know Mr. Cade, our community liaison. Of course. Mr. Cade, your work in Ashmore has been efficient. Elias smiled. We just try to clear the path for progress. In fact, Celia, I was hoping to confirm the final schematic schedule, the Ashmore elevation plans. Nora moved in, her tray steady, her left hand gripping the handle. Champagne? Her arm was less than 3 feet from them. She double-tapped the rivet. A tiny, tactile vibration confirmed it was active. Celia Dorn waved a dismissive hand at the tray. Thank you. No. Elias, the board is firm. The final zoning approvals are contingent on the lots being cleared. The final fire safety inspection can't happen until the condemned structures are gone. Elias leaned in, his voice dropping. Nora adjusted the tray, pretending to straighten the glasses. My team is prepared for the final structural clearance this Sunday morning, 3:12 a.m. It will be a clean sweep. By the time the inspectors arrive at 9, the site will be ready for your Fresh Start Fund to begin processing. Structural clearance, and Celia said, nodding. 3:12 a.m. Excellent. A clean site is a fundable site. Now, if you'll excuse me, Elias, I see the mayor. Nora had it. All of it. The time, the confirmation, the coded language. She backed away slowly, melting into the crowd of servers, her heart hammering. She was heading for the kitchen exit when a hand clamped down on her arm. I know you, a harsh voice said. She turned. It was a man in a headset and a rumpled suit, one of the floor managers. He was a regular at the Lantern, a man who always complained his coffee was cold. You're the waitress from that dump on Ashmore. Penny's Lantern. Nora tried to pull her arm free. Sir, I'm working. What are you doing here? He snarled, his eyes narrowing. You're not with this crew. He signaled to a nearby security guard, not one of Antonio's. This one, she's crashing. Check her. Nora? Marla's voice was sharp in her ear. Service door. Northwest, go. Now. Rook is creating a distraction at the front. Nora didn't hesitate. She dropped the tray, not the recording tray, but a second one she'd picked up, and the crash of champagne flutes gave her the second she needed. She sprinted, shoving past a surprised guest, and darted for the staff-only door. The floor manager shouted. An alarm, a discreet electronic chime, began to sound. She burst into the blinding stainless steel of the main kitchen, a chaotic world of shouting chefs and clanging pans. Behind the fish station, Marla yelled. Corridor B. Nora skidded on the wet floor, dodged a cart full of pastries, and plunged into a narrow, concrete hallway. Footsteps hammered behind her. The floor manager and 2 real security guards. Left. She took the turn. Finding a set of steep service stairs, she scrambled down, her cheap server shoes slipping. She hit the bottom, a loading bay, and was faced with 2 massive steel doors. One was locked. They're coming down the stairs, she panted. The second door, a roll-up loading dock, was suddenly wrenched open from the outside. Antonio Cacciatore stood there, silhouetted against the alley lights, his tuxedo unruffled. He wasn't breathing heavily. He grabbed her hand. He's fast, she gasped. He's not fast enough, Antonio said, pulling her out into the alley. They didn't run for his sedan. He pulled her toward a battered white delivery van, the side painted with a cheerful logo of a smiling rose. They piled into the back, landing on bundles of ferns as the van's tires screeched, pulling away from the curb just as the guards burst into the alley. Nora lay in the dark, the van swaying wildly, the smell of roses and damp earth filling her lungs. She was shaking, not from fear, but from a wild, giddy surge of adrenaline. She clutched the precious aluminum tray to her chest. Antonio sat across from her, a dark shape in the gloom. The van slowed, settling into normal city traffic. He leaned forward. Nora could see his face now, illuminated by the passing streetlights. His eyes were bright, his expression unreadable. He reached out and, with one finger, gently touched her cheek. Then he leaned his forehead against hers. A brief, solid contact. "You did better than any agent I've ever known," he whispered. They played the file in the back of the van, the speakers hooked up to the tray's recorder. Elias Cade's voice was perfectly clear. "Sunday morning, 3:12 a.m., a clean sweep. The site will be ready." Antonio's face was stone. He's going to burn them alive in their beds. When they got back to the Verano Tower, Marla was waiting. She took the recording and, within 10 minutes, had the final piece of her puzzle. "Here it is," she said, projecting the flow chart onto the wall. Hopecrest Foundation makes a charitable grant to Third Lantern Holdings for urban renewal. Third Lantern uses that money to hire Ashmore Redev Group to acquire the properties. Ashmore Redev gives a cut to the Sable Court to act as enforcers. The money is clean before it's even spent. The entire conspiracy was laid bare, a foundation built on the ashes of the poor. "We have it," Nora said, her voice shaking with a mixture of victory and horror. "We have to take this to the police, to the MIB, the Metropolitan Integrity Bureau." Antonio looked at the screen, his expression dark. "The MIB, yes, that's the right move, the clean move." He turned to Nora. "But you need to understand what happens next. You'll be a witness. They will put you in protective custody. You and Milo will be taken, hidden. You might not see Greyhaven again for years. You'll be safe. But you'll be in a cage." Nora looked at the evidence. The unholy alliance of charity and crime. She thought of her apartment, of Penny's lantern, of the life she had fought so hard to build. She had the proof to save her neighborhood, but she realized, with a sickening lurch, that using it might mean losing everything she had been fighting for. Nora chose the middle path, away between the courts and the street. She found Theo March, a community lawyer whose office smelled of old case files and instant coffee, and whose suit looked slept in. She didn't trust him with the original recording, but she gave him a lifeline. "This is a verified transcript," she explained, sliding a thin manila folder across his cluttered desk. She kept the aluminum tray, the real evidence, for herself. "It contains names, a specific time Sunday morning, 3:12 a.m., and a clear conspiracy to commit arson. I want you to file it with the Metropolitan Integrity Bureau. Flag it as an imminent threat to public safety. The source must remain anonymous." Theo March read the first page, his weary eyes widening. "Celia Dorn, Elias Cade kid. This is a bomb. If I walk this into the MIB, they're going to want the source, an anonymous tip. They might bury it." "They won't," Nora said, her voice cold. "You tell them the full, unedited audio will be delivered to the North Coast Ledger if they don't act on it immediately. It's not a tip. It's a warning." It was a compromise, an attempt to use the clean system Antonio distrusted, but with the leverage of the street. The file was delivered to the MIB at 9 a.m. The leak happened by 11. Marla Quay, whose reach into the city's digital infrastructure was absolute, delivered the news to Antonio at noon. Her voice, usually so clipped and precise, was vibrating with cold rage. "It was a deputy investigator named Henshaw," Marla reported over a secure line. "He logged the file, then made a 15-minute call to a private number. The number belongs to the lead counsel for the Hopecrest Foundation. He didn't just summarize the threat. Antonio, he identified the source. His exact words were, 'The information is coming from the waitress at Penny's Lantern.' The compromise had failed. Nora's attempt at a clean solution had just painted a target on her back. The next afternoon, she went to pick Milo up from school. The air was cold, the sky a flat, unforgiving gray. She saw him from a block away, standing on the curb, separated from the other children. He was holding a sleek, black box, a new, expensive-looking toy drone was hovering 20 feet above his head, its small propellers a high-pitched whine. "Milo!" Nora screamed, a primal terror that ripped her throat. He turned, his face alight with a joy she hadn't seen in months. "Mommy, look, a nice man gave it to me. He said he was impressed with my sense of wonder." Nora sprinted, grabbing the complex controller from Milo's small hands. She didn't know how to fly it. She slammed the sticks forward, crashing the drone into the brick wall of the school, where it shattered into a dozen pieces. "Mommy, you broke it!" Milo burst into tears, the sudden violence shocking him. "We never, ever take gifts from strangers." "Milo," Nora yelled, her voice frantic as she pulled him into her arms. Scanning the street, the sidewalks were empty. The nice man was gone. The message, however, was brutally clear. "We see your son. We can touch him whenever we want." When she burst through the door of her apartment, Antonio was there. He wasn't leaning. He was standing in the middle of her living room, a rigid statue of fury. He had seen it all from the window. "That is it." His voice was terrifyingly quiet. "The game is over. Pack a bag, one for you, one for him. Rook is waiting downstairs. You will be in a safe house in a different state by midnight." "No," Nora said, slamming the door. Milo, sensing the tidal wave of adult anger, fled to his room. "This is not a discussion, Nora." Antonio's voice finally erupted, a roar that rattled the cheap glasses in her kitchen. "They put their hands on your son." "And what happens when we run?" she threw back at him, her own terror transmuting into a white-hot rage. "They know who I am. They'll find us, won't they? They'll follow us for the rest of our lives, waiting for us to feel safe. And then they'll send another nice man with a gift. I will not live like that." "I will handle Elias Cade," Antonio growled, stalking toward her. "I will end this, the way I should have from the start, the street way." "And what does that mean?" "Antonio," she shouted, refusing to back down. "What does handle mean? Does it mean you make him disappear? Does it mean you get to use your violence and hide behind me and my son as the justification?" "I am not your excuse. I will not be the woman and child that gives the Morello Circle the moral high ground to start a war." The words hit him harder than a physical blow. He stopped, his face pale. "You think this is business," he whispered, his voice raw. "Territory. You think I am afraid of a war. I am not afraid of the Sable Court. I am afraid of losing you." They broke the code. They threatened a child, your child, and they threatened you. The honor of my family means nothing if I cannot protect. If I cannot protect you. The silence in the room was absolute, the unspent adrenaline vibrating in the air. They were two worlds, collided and broken. Antonio's phone vibrated, a sharp, insistent buzz. He ignored it. "I won't run," Nora said, her voice dropping, hollowed out by the argument. "I will not teach my son that the only way to be safe is to disappear." The phone buzzed again. He snatched it from his pocket, barking, "What?" into the receiver. He listened. The color drained from his face, the anger, the passion, it all vanished, replaced by a cold, immediate dread. He looked at Nora, his eyes wide. "That was Rook," he said, his voice flat. "He's been sweeping the lantern every night. Elias Cade wasn't just planting a camera. He was planting a trigger. The main gas line in the kitchen. It's been tampered with. It's wired to a small, professional charge, linked to a timer. It's set to go off in 48 hours. Nora's mind raced. 48 hours? That's Sunday morning. Just before his fire, Antonio finished, the horrifying logic falling into place. He's not just framing the diner for a gas leak anymore. He's destroying the evidence. He's destroying the witness. You, Nora felt the floor drop out from under her, but the terror was replaced by a sudden, icy clarity. He's still going to burn those tenements. Antonio, he'll blow up the diner, blame me, and still go ahead with his 3:12 a.m. clearance. We have to stop both. She slammed her hand on her small kitchen table. We are not just saving the diner, we are saving the whole neighborhood. Antonio watched her, the fighter he had first seen at the counter, the woman who had refused to break. He visibly reined in his towering instinct to lock her in a box and keep her safe. He nodded, the leader returning, the lover stepping back. "All right," he said, his voice low and steady. "No more running. We fight, but we do it on new terms. My terms and yours. I am not your boss. Nora, I will not give you an order. I will not make a single move that involves your safety unless you agree to it. Every tactical step from here on out. It requires 2 yeses, yours and mine, understood." It was the ultimate concession, not of power, but of control. He was offering her true, terrifying partnership. 2 yeses, she agreed. The fight was gone. The adrenaline was gone. All that remained was the crushing, silent weight of the 48 hours ahead. The apartment was dark, the only light the sick orange glow of Greyhaven's streetlights. Antonio didn't move to leave. He just stood there, his shoulders slumped, looking exhausted. He opened his arms. It wasn't a gesture of passion, it was a request for an anchor. Nora walked into his embrace, pressing her face against the rough wool of his jacket. His arms closed around her, pulling her so tight it almost hurt, as if he could weld her to him. It wasn't the soft, exploratory kiss of the greenhouse. It was the desperate, clinging embrace of 2 people at the bottom of a trench, the whistle of artillery overhead. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. The words were heavy, ripped from him. "I know," she whispered, her voice muffled against his chest, her arms locking around his waist. "I love you, too." They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the darkness. There was no peace in it. It was not an escape. It was an admission, a shared breath before the final battle. The Verano Tower office had become a war room. The clock was a tyrant, showing just over 40 hours until Elias Cade's 3:12 a.m. deadline. "The Sable Court is greedy, but they aren't smart," Marla Key stated, her fingers a blur across 3 separate keyboards. She was orchestrating the first layer of the trap. "They rely on rumors. I'm starting one." She manufactured a false data stream, a whisper campaign on the secure networks Elias Cade's enforcers used. It spoke of a compromised safe, full of bearer bonds from a rival crew, stashed in an unsecured locker at Dock 17. "They won't be able to resist taking a look, not when they think the Morello Circle is also sniffing around it," Marla said, a rare, cold smile touching her lips. "It'll pull half of Cade's street muscle away from Ashmore by nightfall. They'll be chasing ghosts." "Which leaves the Ashmore Redev office," Nora said, her eyes fixed on the blueprints Marla had projected on the wall. "The final Hopecrest transfer. It's scheduled for 5 p.m. today. We need that transaction log. We need Celia Dorn's final authorization." "It's a biometric lock." "Nora," Antonio said, his voice flat. He looked at her. The 2 yeses rule hanging heavy in the air. "Cade will be there. He'll be paranoid after the gala. It's too high risk." "He's not looking for me," Nora insisted, her voice steady. "He's looking for you. He's looking for a gangster. He's not looking for the woman who mops the floors. I have a gray uniform from the building's contracted cleaning service. I can get in. Yes or no, Antonio." He stared at her, the fight in his eyes warring with a raw fear he couldn't hide. He saw the iron in her spine. "Yes," he finally bit out, "but you plant the broadcaster. You do not engage. You do not wait. You get out." At 4:30 p.m., Nora Vale was invisible, in a faded gray jumpsuit that smelled of ammonia. Pushing a yellow mop bucket, she was just part of the scenery. She badged into the Ashmore Redev Group's office suite, her head down, her movements slow and weary. The main room was empty, the cheap suit agents gone for the day. But Elias Cade's office door was open. She could hear his voice, low and angry, on a call. She slipped unseen into the server room, a cramped, hot closet that smelled of dust and overheating plastic. The device Marla had given her, a mini broadcaster the size of a deck of cards, had to be attached directly to the main server hub. Her fingers, slick with sweat, fumbled with the magnetic clamps. She heard the outer office door click shut. The main lights in the suite went off. Elias was locking up, and she was still inside. Footsteps approached the server room. Nora didn't hesitate. She slid behind a bank of humming machines, pressing herself into the narrow, dark gap of an electrical closet, pulling the metal door almost shut. The server room door opened. Elias Cade stood in the doorway, his silhouette stark against the office's dim emergency lighting. He sniffed the air. Like an animal sensing a change in the wind, he knew something was wrong. Nora's heart hammered, a trapped bird against her ribs. She pressed her back to the wall, her eyes squeezed shut. She forced her lungs to obey, using the breathing technique from the greenhouse. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. The silent count was the only thing keeping her from screaming. Cade lingered, his head tilted. Then his phone buzzed, a sharp, angry vibration. He glanced at it, his focus broken. "What?" he snapped. He turned and walked out of the server room, but she could hear him pacing in the main office. Still there. The call Elias received was from Antonio. "Parking garage, level C. We need to talk." Elias smirked, patting the pistol concealed under his turtleneck. "You're sloppy, cacciatore," he muttered to himself. He strode out, locking the main suite door behind him, leaving Nora trapped in the darkness. Antonio was waiting, leaning against a damp concrete pillar, a lone figure in the yellow, flickering light of the underground garage. "Coming to my territory, cacciatore," Elias called out, staying near the elevators, his hand inside his jacket. "That's a bold move, or a stupid one." "This isn't your territory," Antonio said. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that echoed in the concrete space. "This is hers. You broke the code. Cade, you put your hands on a child. You broke the only rule that separates men from animals." Elias laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Rules are for the weak. This city needs a cleansing fire. I'm just the man to light it. We're building an empire. You're just playing in the mud." "You're not building an empire," Antonio said, pushing off the pillar. He walked slowly into the light, his hands empty and visible at his sides. "You're just a vulture. You're building crowns on the ashes of single mothers, and that is a debt that always gets paid." While Elias was distracted by the moral debate, Nora, trapped in the server room, finished her work. The broadcaster was attached. It whirred softly. Back at the Verano Tower, Marla's screen lit up. "I'm in," she whispered into her headset. "The 5 p.m. transfer. It's happening. The wire is moving from Hopecrest, and, oh my God, it wasn't just a ledger, an attachment. A scanned PDF was downloading. "It's the burn order," Marla breathed, her voice cracking. "A direct authorization from Celia Dorn to Third Lantern Holdings. It authorizes emergency demolition and hazardous material clearance for the Ashmore properties, dated for yesterday. She signed off on it before the fire." The file finished downloading. "And there's a schedule," Marla said, her voice turning to ice. "An on-site inspection for Councilman Davies and a city safety inspector. It's scheduled for 9 a.m. Sunday. They're going to discover the tragic accident. We have her. We have all of them." Nora, guided by Marla via her earpiece, escaped the office during the night crew's shift change, slipping out a fire exit. Antonio met her in the connecting stairwell. The air was cold, smelling of steel and city exhaust. She nearly collapsed into him. He caught her, his hands gripping her arms, his eyes searching her face in the dim emergency lighting. "You're safe," he breathed, a statement, not a question. "I got it," she whispered, her hands shaking so hard she could barely stand. "Marla got it." He didn't speak. He just pulled her to him, his mouth finding hers in the darkness. It wasn't the gentle, questioning kiss of the greenhouse. It was desperate, rough, and full of a terrible, consuming fear. It was a kiss that tasted of adrenaline and metal, a raw claiming of life. It was a promise to survive. He pulled back, resting his forehead against hers, their breath ragged. 0 hour, he murmured. Now we set the board. The rest of the night was a blur of calculated, precise action. Rook and Jax, now disguised as city utility workers, moved through the dark streets of Ashmore. They weren't planting weapons. They were planting cameras. Legal, high-definition surveillance units, aimed at the 3 condemned tenements and, most importantly, the alley behind Penny's lantern. All feeds routed directly to Marla's secure server. Nora, her hands now steady, did the one thing Elias wouldn't expect. She went back to the diner. Rook had already located and disarmed the timer on the gas line bomb, but Nora wasn't there to clean up. She was there to install her own device. It was a fake gas alarm, purchased from a hardware store for $30. She wired it, not to the gas line, but to the diner's emergency fire suppression system, the massive tanks of foam meant to put out kitchen grease fires. Elias's new bomb is set for 3:10 a.m., she explained to Antonio over the phone, her voice calm as she twisted the wires. The arsonists are scheduled to light the tenements at 3:12. My alarm is set for 3:08. It will trigger the foam suppression before his charge goes off. It will soak the kitchen, the walls, the bomb itself. It won't stop the explosion, but it will contain it. It will not be the catastrophic accident they've planned. The final move, Antonio made a call, not to Theo March, but to a secure, private line Marla had unearthed. It belonged to a deputy director at the MIB, a woman who owed Antonio's father a life debt. "You have a leak," Antonio said, his voice void of pleasantries. "Investigator Henshaw, he works for Hopecrest. Now, I am sending a package to your private server, the Gala audio, the signed burn order from Celia Dorn, the 9 a.m. inspection schedule, and the live feeds from our cameras in Ashmore. You wanted a bomb. I'm giving you a nuke. You have until 3 a.m. Sunday to mobilize a clean team. After that, it all goes to the press." He hung up. The trap was set. All they could do now was wait for the match to be struck. The clock on the dashboard of the surveillance van read 3:08 a.m. Nora, Antonio, and Marla sat in the cramped, dark space, the air thick with tension. Milo was safe, tucked away in Marla's high-security apartment, guarded by 2 of Antonio's best men. This was the endgame. "Diner feed, now," Antonio commanded. On the screen, Nora's trap sprang. The fake gas alarm she had wired began its electronic shriek. 2 seconds later, the diner's suppression system nozzles burst. It was a violent, silent explosion of white, thick, heavy foam filled the kitchen. A sudden blizzard that submerged the counters, the stove, and the wall where Rook had disarmed the primary bomb but left Elias's secondary charge. The clock clicked to 3:10 a.m. "Alley cam," Marla said. On a separate screen, 3 men in dark hoodies, their faces captured in perfect high definition, stepped into the alley, carrying gasoline cans. They were moving for the tenements. Targets acquired. At the same instant, the diner cam feed flashed white. A muffled, heavy thump vibrated the audio. Elias's bomb had detonated, but it was a wet, impotent pop. The foam had smothered it. The diner was soaked, wrecked, but standing. "He'll be watching," Antonio said, his eyes scanning the perimeter feeds. "He'll know." A black sedan, driving without lights, screeched onto the street. Elias Cade leaped out. He stared at the foam pouring from the diner's back door, then at the 3 arsonists, who were now frozen in confusion. He screamed, a raw, animal sound of pure rage. "He's running," Marla said. "No," Antonio said. "He's not." Elias wasn't running. He was sprinting, directly toward their van. He must have swept the block earlier, found their signal. "Get out now!" Antonio shoved Nora toward the side door, but it was too late. Elias wrenched the door open, his face a mask of fury. Antonio was there, but Elias was faster. He grabbed Nora, yanking her from the van, his arm locking like a steel bar across her throat. "Stop," he roared, pressing something cold and hard against her temple. It was not a weapon, but the heavy, metal case of a portable hard drive. "Back off. Cacciatore, all of you get back." Rook and Jax, materializing from the shadows, froze. Antonio stood 5 feet away, his hands raised, open. He was perfectly, terrifyingly calm. "It's over. Elias, the arsonists are on film. The diner bomb failed. The MIB is on the way." "But I'm not losing," Elias shrieked, dragging Nora backward. "Release her." Antonio's voice was ice. "Let her go, and you live." Elias laughed, a cracked, high-pitched sound. "You think I care? You think I won't? I'll break her neck right here." He was monologuing, ranting at Antonio about the project, about Celia Dorn, about his own genius. Nora, her lungs burning, stopped fighting his grip. She forced her body to go limp, just for a second, catching him off guard. Then she used the 4-7-8 breath. She didn't panic. She acted. She stomped her heel down, grinding it into the arch of his foot, as he roared and his grip involuntarily loosened on her throat. She didn't try to pull away. She twisted into him, slamming her right elbow backward into his exposed wrist, the one holding the hard drive. She heard a distinct, wet snap. Elias howled, a sound of pure agony, his arm falling limp. Nora was free. She stumbled forward as Rook and Jax moved in. A silent, brutal wave of motion. They didn't hit him, they simply subdued him, a swarm of professional control. Elias was on his knees, his broken wrist cradled to his chest, before he could make another sound. The sun rose on a scene of quiet, controlled chaos. The MIB. The clean team the deputy director had promised had secured the street. The 3 arsonists, picked up by Rook and Jax, were handed over. At exactly 9 a.m., as the last of the foam was being hosed from the sidewalk, the black town car arrived. Celia Dorn stepped out, a vision of philanthropic concern in a pearl gray suit, followed by a sweating Councilman Davies. She surveyed the scene, her face a perfect mask of horror. "Oh, my word," she gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "What has happened? That poor diner." The MIB deputy director, a woman with iron gray hair and zero patience, stepped in front of her. "Celia Dorn, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit arson, wire fraud, and attempted murder." Celia's shock was flawless. "This is preposterous. I am a pillar of this community. I demand you release me. I am here to inspect the revitalization site." From the curb, where he was being loaded into an ambulance, Elias Cade began to laugh. It was a gurgling, horrible sound. "You idiots," he spat, his face contorted in pain and malice. "You think this is it? You think she'd be that stupid? You got nothing?" He looked directly at Nora, his eyes burning with a promise of eternal hatred. "Vault L, there's a secondary data core, a full mirror. It's purging as we speak. In 1 hour, every file, every transfer, every last trace of Hopecrest and Third Lantern will be gone. You didn't win. You just delayed." In Antonio's earpiece, Marla's voice was frantic. "He's right. I'm seeing a massive deletion protocol activating on a different secure node. It's deep. I can't break the encryption. The entire system is set to self-destruct in 60 minutes. Antonio looked at Nora. The MIB was busy with Celia, who was now demanding her lawyer. The street was clean, but the war was not. This was the final move. This was theirs. "Nora," he said, his voice low, honoring the pact. "Your decision." Nora's mind was racing. Vault L, the gala, the coded chatter, Ashmore elevation, structural clearance. And then, a stray phrase from Celia, bragging to the councilman. "So secure. Even my passwords are just pleasant memories. A drive in Delaware, the mint on my balcony, the sky at dusk." "I know the password," she said, her voice shaking but certain. "I know the password. It was in the gala recording. She said it." She looked at Antonio, the man who had offered her separation as a form of love. "Yes." He nodded once, a sharp, final agreement. Yes. They ran for his sedan. They left the MIB to clean up the street, the ashes of the first battle. Marla was on the phone, guiding them. Her voice, a rapid-fire staccato of directions. It's a data storage facility, sub-basement of a disused parking garage off the Ironweave. They tore through the morning traffic. The siren, he used a low, illegal thrum. The adrenaline of the fight was gone, replaced by a cold, racing dread. This was it. Antonio gripped the wheel, his knuckles white. He didn't look at her, but he spoke, his voice raw, stripped of all artifice. After tonight, he said, the words heavy, if we stop this, the world will still be what it is. The Sable Court has a long memory. Celia's friends are powerful. They won't forget you. He took a sharp, shuddering breath. So this is the promise. Either we find a way to peace, together, or I send you and Milo away, so far away that no one, not even my own men, can find you. A true separation, to keep you safe. That is the only other way this ends. It was the most painful, honest vow he could make. It was a promise to destroy his own life to save hers. Nora couldn't speak. She just reached across the center console, her hand finding his. He gripped it, his fingers locking with hers, a desperate, crushing hold. A short, unspoken I love you passed between them, a final breath of air before they plunged back under the water. The storm wasn't over. It was just waiting for them at Vault L. Vault L was not a vault. It was a concrete tomb, 3 levels beneath a derelict parking garage, smelling of cold ozone and damp cement. Celia Dorn was already there, flanked by 2 men in dark suits who were not lawyers, and one man who was clutching a briefcase. They stood before a bank of servers. A heavy steel blast door opened behind them. Marla, status, Antonio said into his cufflink, his voice tight. The deletion protocol is locked. Antonio, Marla's voice crackled in Nora's earpiece, frantic. It's not a hack. It's a physical dead man's switch. It's purging. I can't stop it. You have 90 seconds. Max, before the system wipes and the secondary charge detonates. Celia Dorn looked up, her expression not of fear, but of profound annoyance. You're too late, Mr. Cacciatore, and you brought the waitress. How sentimental. This entire system will cease to exist in less than 2 minutes. The main terminal screen showed a single entry field, glowing red. A timer in the corner read 1 minute and 29 seconds. I can't bypass it, Nora, Marla said, her voice tight with panic. It's asking for a 3-word phrase. It's a key phrase, not a password. I'm locked out. Nora stared at the screen, the red numbers blurring. The panic rose, the suffocating tightness in her chest, Elias's arm across her throat, the scalding oil. She forced her lungs to obey. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. She closed her eyes. The greenhouse, the gala, the chaos. She heard Celia's voice, not the panicked shrieking of her arrest, but the smooth, arrogant bragging by the fountain. So secure. Even my passwords are just pleasant memories. A drive in Delaware, the mint on my balcony, the sky at dusk. Nora's eyes snapped open. The timer read 58 seconds. She lunged past Antonio, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Della Mint Sky. She slammed the enter key. The terminal flashed from red to green. Access granted. Deletion protocol paused. No! Celia Dorn shrieked, her mask of civility vaporizing. She pulled a small, silver pistol from her designer handbag. You little gutter rat, you have ruined everything! She raised the gun, her hand shaking violently, aiming it directly at Nora. Antonio moved. He didn't draw a weapon, he didn't dive. He simply stepped in front of Nora, shielding her completely with his body. He stood tall, his tuxedo immaculate, a human wall. He had made a promise to protect without becoming the monster. You won't shoot, he said, his voice calm, projecting. You're a philanthropist. Celia, not a killer. It's too messy. I'll kill you both. Nora, protected behind Antonio's back, wasn't idle. The screen now showed a file directory. She saw Marla's remote cursor appear, highlighting 3 protocols. Nora clicked the Master Execute button. "What did you do?" Celia gasped. "Insurance," Nora said, her voice shaking but clear. "The full package. It just went to the MIB clean team, the North Coast Ledger, and the Greyhaven Civil Court. Even if this vault blows, the data is already out. You're done." As she spoke, the wail of sirens grew, echoing down the parking ramp. The MIB team, guided by Marla, had arrived. Celia looked from the gun to the approaching red and blue lights. The timer on the wall, triggered by the unauthorized access, had reset. System self-destruct 7 seconds. "It's over," Antonio said. The timer hit 3 seconds. Antonio didn't wait. He grabbed Nora, wrapping his arms around her, and threw them both backward into the small, reinforced safe room they had entered from. He covered her body with his own as the timer hit 0. The explosion was not fire. It was a deafening hiss, a pressurized blast of inert gas designed to destroy the magnetic drives, not the building. The air pressure change threw the blast door shut with the sound of a cannon shot. Silence. In the cramped, dark, safe room, Nora was breathless, crushed under Antonio's weight. "Are you—" He lifted himself up, his face inches from hers. It was just gas. He breathed. "A cleanup." The MIB agents, led by the iron-haired deputy director, wrenched the outer door open. They found Celia Dorn on her knees, sobbing, the small pistol useless beside her. She was cuffed and led away, her illusion of grace shattered. The fallout was immediate. The emergency city council meeting was a media circus. The North Coast Ledger had published the burn order, the wire transfers, the gala audio. Hope Crest Foundation, Third Lantern Holdings, and the Ashmore Redev Group imploded in a single afternoon. Councilman Davies resigned. The revitalization project was canceled, effective immediately. Nora only went to court once, to see Elias Cade sentenced. He was wheeled in, his wrist in a complex cast as they took him away. He looked back at her. "You think you won?" he sneered. "You're still just a waitress. You only won because you had him." Nora met his gaze, her voice clear in the quiet courtroom. "I didn't win because I had him. We won because we respect each other's choices." Penny's Lantern didn't just reopen, fueled by a new community trust funded anonymously, but managed, quite legally. By Marla Quay, it was restored. It was declared a neighborhood heritage site, a symbol of Ashmore's resilience. The Morello Circle quietly withdrew all interests from the district. The peace was unfamiliar. That night, Nora found Antonio on the rooftop greenhouse. Milo was there, fast asleep on the bench again, clutching the new truck. The city lights of Greyhaven glittered below, no longer looking like a threat, just like lights. She stood beside him, breathing in the smell of mint and damp earth. "Is it over?" she whispered. "It's starting," he said. He looked at her, the hard lines of the boss softened by the yellow cafe lights. "My promise stands, Nora. Separation, if you want it. Safety." "You said," she replied, "that I was your compass. A compass only works if it's close." He didn't kiss her. He just leaned his forehead against hers, a gesture of pure, grounding relief. She slid her calloused hand into his. It wasn't a promise of no more storms. It was a promise to never be alone in the rain. "Not forever safe," he murmured, "but forever together." He pulled back. Reaching into his jacket, he produced a single white envelope. "The original," he said, "the $20,000. Nora looked at it, the money that had started everything, the cage, the escape. "It's a check," he said. "It's not for you." She took it. It was made out to the Milo Vale Scholarship Fund. Nora smiled, a real, slow, genuine smile. She took a pen from the potting bench, turned the check over, and signed her name on the back. "What's that for?" he asked. "Endorsement," and she said, "a deposit on a decent future." He returned the smile. The scene held, the man, the woman, and the sleeping child, safe above the city they had saved. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Where in the world are you listening from? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to connect and share our thoughts. Please subscribe to Mafia Boss Stories, like this video. And if you enjoyed this story, support us by hitting that hype button so we can reach more listeners just like you.